Let's talk about heads. Right, so this is, I have two, if we get that rocker cover out of the way of this one. This is a shiny new one, and this is a built up used one. So I've taken the cam caps off already, so I can lift the cams out. So we have a pair of cams. They take variable valve timing sprockets on the front that are chain driven, and then just conventional cast cams that have been ground. So we will figure out the duration and the lift and stuff on the cams. We'll basically jig out the cams, put them on a cam measuring device and figure out the numbers, which is fine. So on the face of it, they look pretty similar. There are some differences we've noticed already from 1 to 2, and I've got some ideas of what they are, and we just need to bed out those ideas really. But that is it. That is a pair of V8 McLaren cylinder heads. They're both the same bank, so you can compare side to side. The only bit missing out of these ones is a complete valve gear, so we're missing valves, spring seats, valve stem seals, springs, retainers and collets. And we're also missing the lifter assemblies, and we're missing the shims. So this is the lifter assembly or the rocker assembly holding. So this sits across the top around the spark plug tube and holds the lifters, holds the rockers. And if you look, they're completely missing here. The best bit about this is the rocker arms DLC coated. So you can see they look black. So that's an anti-friction coating. And every engine needs this. That's proper trick. So it is something we would do on real high performance engines. We would DLC coat the piston pins, anything with sort of where you're trying to remove friction, you can use super finishing, this type of coating. So the cam wipes on this rocker, lifter arm, whatever you want to bloody call it. There's no hydraulic tappet. It is old school bike stuff. So it is that, it is a shim. Sits right on the top. That is it. So you've got the valve, the shim sits on the valve head. The lifter sits on that. And then the cam sits on the top like so. And then you would get your trusty feeler gauge and measure your clearance. So building heads on these is going to be fun because you're going to have to bolt everything down, do your clearance, measure it all out, take the cams back out, lift your lifters, take your shims out, move your shims around, buy new shims to get your valve clearance. So that's the valve actuation side of it. We have also got, they're pretty hefty springs to be fair. Looking at those, I don't know whether you can get inside the head, Dave, and see. Back to backing them, the geometry of the spring is quite serious on these. We'll get them out and we'll profile the spring on a spring tester. I think I've done a video on that, of how we measure the springs. So we can do that. Yeah, so that's what goes on inside the head. As you can probably see on that one, there's nothing in it, it's empty. This is the exhaust side. There is no secondary air ports. So again, we'll have a look into how that works, but it's not in the exhaust ports like on some of the other engines we work on. Then, if you look at the front end, which is the interesting bit, if I do that, and if I do the same on this one, that's your inlet side. Now the big difference is across these two heads, and we're still trying to bed out whether this is what models everything is. Twin injector, single injector. Now I know a 720 is twin injector, so these could be 720 heads. We're still trying to figure everything out. Could be 650 heads, to be honest, as well. We're just working with our local McLaren dealer to figure everything out on these. To figure out exactly what they are, because that's the biggest difference between them. But they are 570 heads, 650 heads, that sort of thing. We're just trying to figure out what these ones are. There's loads of improvements you can make. I mean, I don't know whether you can see down inside how sort of nasty they are casting wise. So we can we'll have a little play with that. We'll profile out the ports. We'll go to our friends at Ram Air and use their flow bench and get some numbers out of them and see what the heads are doing, inlet and exhaust. We can measure the valve train out, and if I flip it over, you know, it's quite a simple combustion chamber. You know, it's still a port engine. It's not a DI engine, so the complexity of in the combustion chamber, like some of the other stuff we work on, isn't there, because you're doing all the swirl and all the tumble up in the inlet ports, and the runner, you're not doing it inside the combustion chamber like on a DI engine. So we'll strip them all apart. I mean, just to give you a quick inlet is 37 and exhaust is 29. So I mean, straight away, that's a pretty big inlet to exhaust ratio. But again, if you look, you're instantly out of space. You can't go much bigger. The edge of the seat, I don't know if you can see it, David. Let me get a pic, mate. I can show you a little bit more. The edge of the exhaust sort of seat is already in the combustion chamber wall. So you're starting to get to that point where if you wanted to go oversize on exhaust, you're physically, the geometry of the cylinder head means you're out of space. So straight away looking at it, that is always going to be a compromise. But that's quite a big disparity between the two. On what we would normally see, might work for these. But again, until we start playing with the numbers, the pressure differential across the cylinder head from log data, combustion pressure analysis and that sort of thing, people are guessing. So we'll have a little play. It'll be interesting to see. This one hasn't got anything in it at all, but I wonder whether you can see. You can tell these have been stored a little while because the seats are starting to go a bit grotty, but I mean, you can see down inside the port there. See, now on this one, that's quite interesting. Straight away, look, I said about secondary air, and you can just see those holes there. Don't know whether you can see them. Just there. So they would appear to be what would be used for secondary air. There we go. And then that's it there. So straight away, look, there's a difference straight away between the two. Every day is a school day. That is what we would expect to see a secondary air valve bolted to. Secondary air is allowing oxygen into the exhaust tract on cold start to burn the overfueling. So to get an engine running when it's cold, you overfuel. That's bad for emissions, is one. The other side of that is if you then put oxygen in the exhaust tract as well, you can then combust that fuel and help heat the cat, so cat heating. So that's got it. And this, I'll have to pull a valve out and look, but I can't see or feel anything in this one. So straight away, a little interesting difference between the two. So literally pulled these out of the box this morning when Davey got here, so we haven't had a large amount of time to sort of go through everything. But you know, it's gonna be quite an interesting project. Core plugged. Yeah, should be quite cool to see where they end up. Be interesting to flow bench the two, and there's certainly loads of gains in them ports, considering how big your inlet valves are, and the core shift and the casting marks left inside them. There's quite a lot to be said. But even if you look down in there, Davey, have a look, mate. You can see that the valve guide doesn't protrude into the port. Same on this one, so that's both the same. If I drop in shims, if I flip 2 seconds, mate. If you look down inside this one, mate, if I wipe away this build assembly lube, you can see where we've machined back the valve guide in those to get them out the way. So that's something we would naturally do when building a head, and it's something on this one that's already done like. But we'll have a little play, we'll get them apart, we'll figure out the valve angles, and then yeah, we can spend some time on the flow bench then and see what works. I need to make a fixture up, so what you would do on a flow bench is you would use a DTI. You'd put soft springs in for starters, and then you would use a dial indicator and like a screw wheel and measure the flow through the inlet at like millimeter increments of valve lift and profile the flow. But what we're going to need to do is, I've got it for the V10s, but we're going to need to make a fixture, one that can adjust the valve, and two that can then hold a DTI gauge in the right place and at the right valve angle to help you record your measurements as you do that. So we've got a couple of bits. I've already spoken to an engineer friend around the corner who's going to help me do some of the tooling for that, just so we can start measuring it out. I'm going to send the cams away and get them profiled. One, so we can understand the numbers on them, because I haven't got a cam measuring jig. And two, so we can actually look at getting some billet items made, getting our own cams made. Just to, billet always looks fancy. And see if there's any improvements there. So I'll know more over the coming days of exactly what they are. I've sent the part numbers off to understand, but straight away you can see two cylinder heads that look extremely similar that are completely different. Yeah, so a nice chat about head.